Across the EU, over 50 billion euros a year. That's almost 40% of the overall budget. It's been reformed, aims to go greener, but it's still not without controversy. Hello and welcome to Ireland for this special show dedicated to looking at the Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP. In this show, we're going to be visiting farms across Europe, looking at what's being done to get young farmers back working the land, to see whether or not farmers in general are being encouraged to do more for the environment, and to see what happened since the end of those milk quotas. But we start here in Ireland, which has an economy rooted in agriculture. 10% of the population works in it. Ireland is famous for its lush green countryside, 64% of which is used for agriculture. That's 4.5 million hectares. The country's agri-food sector is one of the biggest industries and accounts for 8.5% of employment. But Irish farmers are getting old, with the average age being 57. Less than 7% of men and women working the fields are under 35. The average income for a farm in Ireland was €26,974 in 2015, with 70% coming from the Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP. CAP has earmarked €11 billion for investment in Ireland from 2014 to 2020. New reforms to this policy mean that a total of 30% of the direct payments from CAP are now linked to environmentally friendly farming practices, such as crop diversification, maintaining permanent grassland, and conserving 5% of areas of ecological interest. Ireland's total greenhouse gas emissions per capita are among the highest in the EU, almost a third of that total coming from agriculture. Okay, well, I'm now with the Commissioner for Agriculture, who happens to be an Irishman, Mr. Phil Hogan. Mr. Hogan, thanks for being with us. Tell us, the CAP reforms, they've come into play just now in 2015. A lot of people not really fully understanding how these CAP reform works. How's it been going down?
Farmers generally don't like change, and it takes some time to adapt. Well, there's a significant amount of investment now by farmers and people engaged in agriculture and environmental measures. 30% or €16.2 billion per annum is being paid to farmers to ensure that we have good environmental practice. And that's a significant change from the last reform. Also, we are, I suppose, accentuating the positives in relation to market orientation of the CAP. There is now a more demanding requirements on sustainability. The customer is king right around the world, and they're looking for a lot more information regarding production and processing for the benefit of the consumers worldwide.
Looking at the figures across Europe, only 6% of farmers are under 35. A third of them are over 65. It looks like we've really an ageing farming population.
This is the first Common Agricultural Policy where there's a 25% top-up for young farmers in relation to direct payments. And that's just a start. So we know that much more has to be done in order to make farming attractive.
Now, also, this is the first year we've seen that end to the milk quotas. That's a pretty big deal for Ireland. How's it been going?
Well, this decision was made as far back as 1998, and some people are surprised that it happened in 2015. So it has happened, and milk production is going to go up considerably in some member states like Ireland. Right across the European Union, we're expecting just 1% increase in milk production in 2015. So it's not going to be a major change, but we have to find new markets because we have an oversupply of milk in the world markets at the moment, including the European Union.
Well, indeed, here in Ireland, in any case, some farmers, since these milk quotas were quashed, they've added milk to their meat production farms. Hervé Amaric caught up with one such farmer at the National Ploughing Championships, an annual competition that this year attracted over 250,000 visitors.
The winners of this competition will represent Ireland in the World Series of Ploughing. The annual rally is an occasion for today's farmers to reflect on the past and the future of their industry.
In order for my sons or daughters to enter into agriculture, the first thing that must happen is commodity prices must go up.
And a young fella that got into milk in the last number of years and put up sheds and built expensive parlours, I don't see how he's going to be able to pay for them in the future.
The Irish government is convinced that agriculture will continue to play a key role in the country's economic recovery. Ireland's 18,000 dairy farmers are encouraged to produce 50% more milk by 2020.
Our challenge is how do we give the system confidence to go after the big opportunity. Ireland produces only 1% of the global dairy in the world. But take an example of a business like infant formula. We produce 12% of the global infant formula. It's a high value business that demonstrates that being a low volume market going after value add can really deliver margin.
Since milk quotas were abolished, Ireland has been the fastest growing milk producer in the world. The annual turnover of the sector is expected to double to €8 billion by 2025. For most of his life, Tom Turley has bred beef cattle and sheep. Last year, he decided to start a dairy herd too, with 50 cows. Now, Tom produces top-quality milk.
In terms of beef farming, the income simply isn't there. Not on a family farm type scale. You just simply have to expand too much. Dairy, there's an opportunity for me. What we produce from our animals is a totally natural product. Nowhere in the world has the same amount of grass and can grow it. The limiting factor, I suppose, the cons is that we only can grow so much on a per hectare basis.
Over 5 years, Tom will invest €250,000 in dairy production, but with the market at a low for the last year and no guarantee that the price of milk will rise anytime soon. Tom warns farmers they should not get carried away by the white gold rush.
Some people are calling it white gold. Our minister certainly is, but as a representative of the Irish Farmers Association, and I'd have to caution farmers in terms of the huge investment that some guys are making, because we're dealing in a volatile market and we have to be careful.
The agro-food sector, which represents 9% of Ireland's workforce, played a strong part in the country's economic recovery. Small farms are still the norm here. Irish farmers are 15 times less in debt than their average continental counterparts. But things may be changing fast.
Farms now are much more like businesses. There's no comparison between the kind of farming that needs to take place now, the sort of business models that are there than was there 30 years ago.
While Irish farmers want to invest to produce more, they're starting to wonder when they will see a return on their investment.
We have seen the price of the milk to the farmer down almost 40%. And that in turn has reduced the incomes of farmers by, in some cases, up to 90% from where they were 12 months ago and previously. There are responsibilities here for the European Commission, indeed the governments who have pushed farmers into expansion.
Irish farmers hope that the EU Agriculture Commissioner, a former Irish minister, understands the need to support them fully while milk prices are at their lowest.
Mr. Hogan, when you think of the milk quotas, you do think it's great for the dairy industry, it's great for big farmers. They're no longer restricted in the amount they can produce. But does it not hamper small farmers? No,
I think everybody can benefit if we get the new market outlets, because all of the milk goes into the same collection points, into the same processors. It's a highly concentrated market now relative to what it was 25 years ago. So we now see big companies being big players worldwide in terms of the value added and the jobs that they're creating in rural areas for so many people.
This greening aspect of the CAP is seen as the most innovative, if you like, element of it. This is the first time really farmers are to be paid for a service they're giving to the environment rather than a product they're putting on the table.
Farmers are the custodians of the landscape, and indeed many of the cross-compliance policies that have been implemented over the years require farmers now, in order to get access to payments, that they must carry out certain environmental obligations on water quality, on soil fertility, and €16.2 billion is being paid to farmers for the purpose of implementing these particular measures, which is 30% of their direct payments.
The vast majority of Irish land is farmed, meaning that it's home to most of the island's wildlife. We're now at Donal Sheehan's farm. He's always been interested in maintaining a rich biodiversity on his land. So what does he think of the greening element of the CAP reform? 55 cows live on Donal Sheehan's dairy farm. Grazing the green grass of Ireland, what they eat also gives Donal sustenance and environmental payment from CAP.
We get paid because all the pasture it's all grass, and we don't need to do any more than that. Thank you for the payment.
Donal already leaves large ditches and parts of his fields fallow as space for wildlife to thrive. He's ready to do more but wants to be paid for it. He says the reformed CAP doesn't offer anything extra in this regard. Instead, it's ended milk quotas, meaning milk prices are now subject to volatile global markets. To avoid a shortfall, many farmers are increasing the size of their herds and ditching the ditch.
And what does the farmer? He has to go and he looks at the hedgerow down in his field. He looks at the bit of wetland down the bottom of the farm. Grove of trees, we'll take that out. We'll keep an extra cow. We'll grow an extra ton of grain, and it's the environment that suffers.
Money to leave the land alone and let diversity bloom. An investment for Donal not just in his farm, but for everyone's benefit. Well, Donal's gone back to finish off milking his cows here, but with me I have Dr Alex Copland, a Senior Conservationist Officer for BirdWatch Ireland. Thanks so much for your time, Alex. What do you think is good and bad about these CAP reforms? We're being told that they're making farming greener than ever. Surely that's a good thing, they're at least trying.
The fundamental issue with the CAP reform is it hasn't changed anything. It's essentially business as usual. It's the same as it always was.
What I had understood is we're paying farmers, for example, to leave things like this hedgerow here, leave that will allow insects and more biodiversity to grow. That's a good thing, no? Or will farmers simply not do it?
Well, it is, yeah, except of course that they don't pay for farmers that have large areas of grasslands, for example. So these margins that we're seeing here, Donal has put in voluntarily. These are not part of the CAP reform. Originally, when the proposals came out, it's fantastic that environmental public goods, the delivery of environmental greening measures being linked to CAP payments, brilliant, fantastic. The problem is that these measures got increasingly watered down as negotiations went on, the CAP process, to the point that now they'll deliver very, very little, if anything. And certainly in Ireland, almost nothing.
Overall, Alex, do you think Ireland good or bad student when it comes to environmental farming?
Bad. Simple as that, unfortunately. It's interesting, the location of Ireland geographically means that, and a lot of the traditional farm structures are probably very good, small farming. The fact that farming is still important in rural economies, that there's large numbers of small farmers is really good. But unfortunately, there's very little protection there of the environment and it gets lost year after year after year.
OK, well, let's turn now to Spain, which I believe is a better student. It's one of the leading countries in organic farming, 1.7 million hectares devoted to it. All reporters went to some of the more innovative farms to see what they think of these new CAP reforms.
In the Valencia region, pickers are hard at work.
We leave the leaf on so that people can see that it's been picked the same day. Thanks to refrigerator lorries, this orange will be in France tomorrow.
Vicente is in charge of the 6 hectares his family has owned since 1929. His land produces 110 tonnes of fruit a year. He receives nearly €7,000 annually in subsidies, half in environmental grants. The new Common Agricultural Policy is supposed to be greener, but Vicente thinks Spain hasn't used its discretion to stimulate organic farming.
The CAP doesn't take into account that orange trees absorb a lot of carbon dioxide, double the amount of conifer trees, for instance. The Polytechnic University of Valencia has provided those results to the European Union, so it can take into account the data in calculating the subsidies.
Vicente exports most of his fruit to other European countries because demand for organic products is weak in Spain. The autonomous region of Valencia, which administers €204 million in European rural development funds, wants to boost demand. This 16-hectare farm works with the Polytechnic University of Valencia to study soil and the adaptation of different crop varieties. Ordinary onions are often treated with a dozen different pesticides per harvest.
We've managed to reduce the treatments used to zero by burning vegetation and thrashing techniques and ecological management of the onion crop.
The results are even better than traditional farming. In her lab, Dolores also studies the nutritional values of vegetables.
Selenium is a really valuable element for our organism. We found a concentration of it in organic onions of more than 35% compared to conventionally farmed onions.
The cooperative wants to use results like that to convince Spanish consumers it's worth spending a little more on organic vegetables to invest in their health. It's one way of growing the market and persuading the authorities to do more to support the sector.
So we've seen there, Alex, they're also struggling there with these new CAP reforms. When we stand here in front of this, what looks to somebody outside of farming like a pretty lush green field, but to you it's a green desert really.
It is. Very intensive grassland. It's not the kind of traditional wildflower meadows that you might see in the Alps or the Pyrenees, or it's not species rich. There's two species of plant here. There's perennial ryegrass and there's clover, and that's it. So there's very, very little biodiversity. There's no flowers, there's very few insects, very little wildlife.
A lot of biodiversity, notably birds, already extinct because of farming in Ireland?
Well, yes. Some of the farming birds certainly have become extinct or incredibly threatened, and our numbers are going down. And it's because of the very intensive way that farming goes. In the use of pesticides, of fertilizers. The idea of squeezing as much production, as many litres of milk, as many kilos of beef, as many tonnes of grain out of every single little bit of ground.
Dr Alex Copland of BirdWatch Ireland, thanks indeed for your time. That brings us to the end of the first half of this show, but we'll be back after the news in Belgium to find out what the story looks like from there.